Look, I think for the last 10 years, you and I have been part of what I call like a factory system of venture capital that came together, right? It literally, you can think it was a production line, right? Like seed investors, people kind of put ideas up. Seed investors said, oh, we're the first line of production. We'll put in money. We'll tinker with it. We'll help you refine the business model and package it to pass it to the Series A people. And the Series A people are like, cool, we'll like tinker with it and like help you kind of hit the right metrics and go after the right things and put capital in and then package it for the Series B people. It's just like this factory line that, and the end of the line is supposed to be valuable public companies, right? And, what happened basically is it's not that you won't have valuable public companies generated in history. You obviously will. But I think that the idea that you could just package and push things down a line, whether it was direct to consumer companies, right? Or, like more recently, like AI companies or whatever, like there's a model you can follow that's going to predictably produce, $1 to $10 billion self-similar enough companies, and you could just produce those at non-artisanal scale. I think that's kind of what fell apart. So now you see the biggest companies are even bigger, and most of the things that were the packaged IPOs have kind of been shitty. And so like the whole factory line is now backed up, right? The public market for this stuff doesn't work, right? Which means the Series D investors overpaid, right? Which means you literally like had a halt button on the factory line. And so I think it was pretty obvious 18 months ago that the factory line was going to grind to a halt. And, as the Series seed tinkerers who are packaging things they hand to the Series A people in a self-similar way where they can easily buy them and then do their step of production, it was pretty clear that like we just had to chill out while they worked through all the inventory that was rotting on the line effectively. And like the rot continues, right? Like it's not like that's over. A few things might sneak out and get public. Maybe it's, I just think like we have a big backup problem. The problem I now see candidly is I just don't see how the line turns back on, right? Like I think that's the big change is like, okay, we'll work through this. We'll figure out the next thing we're packaging, right? And like, some people lose some money or whatever, but like it restarts. And now I'm really unclear as to how the factory restarts like ever. And I'm not worried about that as a seed investor. Like I don't think it's that big a deal. I think these things used to be more artisanal. I think they will be again. I think there are interesting businesses to build and interesting things to invest in. Like I'm very pro all that. I think even we at Slow, I think got really in our heads that like we want to bet on great founders and big ideas. But if we're being honest and look at our portfolio, there's a lot of things we did. We're like, well, we like the option value. Like we know how to package this. We know who's going to buy it. And like we get the markup and, you kind of go from there. I don't think those have been our biggest winners, candidly, right? But I think we fell into the trap of being part of the system. And I think we're kind of getting pushed back out to be real investors and real venture capitalists and not packagers on a factory line.
Say more about that. Flesh out what venture will look like once the factory line is no longer.
Well, again, I think it already is no longer. I think there's just like a bunch of investors there's a bunch of investors that are still doing their little step in production and they're like, why the fuck, what's going on, right? And then there's a bunch of people who are just sitting around twiddling their thumbs, waiting for the line to turn back on. And I'm just saying, you're going to be waiting a long time, right? I think for us, look, the thing I've kind of come to recognize, and I did a lot of angel investing in, call it 2005 to 2012 or something. And then we have had an institutional fund from then until now for the last decade. You kind of start looking at the bigger numbers. All of the deals I'm most proud of and we've made the most money on, both in terms of like real hard American dollar returns, as well as like the biggest marks are the things I'm most excited about. They're all things that were pretty non-consensus in weird industries, right? Where like we had a thesis that other people didn't. And, you do need your crazy theses to eventually become mainstream enough for someone else to want to finance the thing. Like if you have a crazy thesis, unless you're willing to finance it all the way through yourself, which most seed funds can't afford to do, you need to be able to bring someone along, but you do have to start in, I think, a very non-consensus place, right? And I think that's kind of like all of our best deals have looked like that, right? The stuff we've done that, fit more, we did some good clubby stuff, like it's not bad, but like it's not the real wins. And so I think the future of VC is going back to like really pushing investors and founders to think about what is the really interesting opportunities, what are they? They're not going to be the ones that necessarily fit into an easy YC batch, right? And then I think I go a step further, which is I do think the other thing that will change is, seed capital is not something you burn to then raise Series A capital, right? Which is, I think, the mentality. I mean, we espouse it too. It's like, if you asked us a year ago, I think most people would say, what is seed capital for? It's for running a few experiments and de-risking something such that someone pays a much higher price because you figured out something on $1 million or $2 million. I think now it's got to be like, okay, take the money, build a business that works, right? And then, once the business is working, think about the ways to kind of, how to scale it up, how to scale it faster. Make sure that capital is always an option, not a required path in the market. And again, I don't think that's a bad thing. I mean, the reality is, there are certain businesses, AI type stuff, where you just have to burn a huge amount of cash to figure things out in theory. I'm not that interested in those businesses. There's a whole lot of other businesses that, especially given the magical platforms we have now have access to, compared to buying iron a generation ago or whatever it was going to be, right, is are pretty interesting in terms of their scaling properties, right?